what shifts the paradigm is when you refuse to acknowledge that there is a privilege, that you refuse to acknowledge the stresses, the angst that comes from being not just a person of color in the society, a person of color in your dojo.
When we've been there 10,000 years, bright shining as the sun.
Hello, everybody. Miles Kessler here, and I want to welcome you all to a very important and touch community call here today. We're going to be exploring the question of what is an Aikido response to systemic racism, and it is really touching. We're living at a touching time in history. I'm even kind of feeling like the emotional edge just as I introduced this call. Sam told us before she's nervous about this. I am too. I'm also very excited about it, and I think it's something important that we as Aikidoka, I shouldn't say everybody has to, but it's certainly something that I've been struggling with. And one of the lenses that I struggle with it through is my Aikido understanding. And I've invited a few of my friends to join in a panel discussion. And of course, we're gonna have a community breakout later, so everybody will be able to get involved. We'll have a lot of open discussion, well, within the time that we have. But first, I'd like to introduce Judge Eric Moye, an old friend of mine, Aikido sensei. We started Aikido together, not exactly the same time, but back in the day, in the early 80s. Eric, welcome to the call.
Thank you, Miles, and thank you for putting this together, and thank all of you for being here. When he says not exactly starting together, what he really means is I'm a lot older than he is.
He's my senpai. Forever and always, that's how it goes.
My longtime friend and man from whom I still learn a great deal. I'm living in Dallas, Texas. I grew up in New York City, and I have studied literally racism. I'm a lawyer, I'm a reformed lawyer, I'm a judge. I've taught history and I've taught racism in American law at Southern Methodist University. And I think if we're going to talk about racism, it's important to understand what we're talking about. And I've been on Facebook.
Just before you go into the definition for us, can I just do a quick introduction to the other two? I'll lay down the
I'm
ground
sorry, then I'll shut up now.
No, we'll pass it right back to you. So our second panelist is Malory Graham. She's the chief instructor of the Aikido Seattle Aikikai, I believe. Malory, is that right? Yeah, Malory, you want to do a quick introduction for yourself?
Yeah, I'm here at Seattle Aikikai. That's been around for about 23 years. But primarily, I've kind of lived two split lives, one running a dojo in very white Seattle, and the other part of my life has been being a filmmaker and specifically working in the social justice field, running a film school to try to encourage young people of color, also women of color, to become filmmakers, to create a pipeline so that we could get a little bit more diversity in Hollywood. So I've had these two separate worlds happening, and they really feel this week like they have totally collided. And I'm super excited about jumping in on this call, but also really want to acknowledge, you know, I am a privileged white woman here, and I have in my entire career basically known that my role is absolutely to sit back and to amplify the voices. And so knowing that we have incredible panelists here and also incredible people on the call, knowing that I am here to amplify your voice and to be an ally. And as much as possible, I am hearing too that there is a need for that white perspective to help amplify the voice, because sometimes people of color are really tired of having to do it for themselves. So as much as that is of need, I am here to be of service.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Malory. Appreciate that. And our other panelist is Sam Taitel. Sam's she's been practicing Aikido for, she's the millennial. She's the youngin on the panel, but she's been practicing Aikido some 20 years since she's a little I guess, and she's actually living in Minneapolis, and she's been on the front lines of many of the process there. Sam, you want to say hi?
Yeah, hi, I'm Sam. This is Sweeney on my lap. I'm currently living in Minneapolis. I was in New York City for a long time for school and also as a program coordinator at the Museum of Natural History. But this year I was a specialized program teacher. So teaching young Black and brown kids, Hispanic community, and that's really shaped my understanding of this protest too, and how to be more involved in it in a safe way, and really trying to expand people's voices and listen to pain. Malory has helped me a lot investigate my own feelings through this. And as you said, I've been studying Aikido for over 20 years because I was a dojo baby. My mother also trains, but really my birthright of being a millennial through all this and trying to offer different perspective to really advance us forward and progress together.
Beautiful. Welcome, Sam, and welcome everybody. So before we get started, I want to just maybe lay down a few guidelines, because conversations like this can very easily, lots of emotions, very passionate, can easily go off the rails. We are Aikidoka, and every dojo has its reigi. And because we have these beautiful structures in the dojo, we actually develop and learn quite a bit. And let's just remember that Aikido, what's exceptional about Aikido, not that it's better than everything else, but what's kind of unique about Aikido in the martial arts world is that it's a positive sum martial art. It's a 100% life affirming martial art, at least by design and by discovery of O-Sensei, and O-Sensei, I just want to kind of invite everybody to hold O-Sensei's injunction that Budo is love. Budo being fighting the good fight, the martial way, but for a good purpose. And if you take that to its ultimate conclusion, it means that you will fight the good fight, and you will even, to protect that which is good, you would even kill. Love, on the other hand, the absolute opposite, if we take that to its absolute ultimate conclusion, means that you will stay open and you will preserve life and protect life and affirm life, even if it means losing your own life. Those two things by themselves is zero sum. Together, it puts us in this place of a positive sum, an impossible, two absolutes that cannot occupy the same place at the same time is what O-Sensei really brought forth in this world. And that's the energy that we want to hold. That's what will take us to hopefully the resolution of conflict, which is always a return to wholeness. And we are definitely going through a time that is where people are waking up and saying, well, look, we are not whole. And with that, I would like to pass the mic to Judge Moye, and maybe share a little bit about what we're looking at here.
Well, thank you. That discussion, that revelation about Budo and love probably deserves its own seminar over days of people to talk about. The profundity of that is just amazing. And thanks for bringing that, Miles. When we first started having this multi-log, not a dialogue, but a discussion among a number of people about racism, someone talked about systemic racism. And it resonated because that's a redundancy. And let's first start with unpack what we're talking about. Racism isn't my calling or someone calling me a slur. Racism isn't just that. Racism is a system. Racism is a process. Racism is the manifestation of institutionalized bigotry, where someone makes a determination that another identifiable group is different and is going to be subjugated. That's bigotry. When someone says, I don't like this individual because they're blonde haired, or because they're dark skinned, or because their eyes are not round, that's discrimination. Racism is different. Racism is a systemic utilization of all of the institutions of a society. Bringing this to the United States, what that means is people from Europe show up here, take property from the indigenous population, and try to figure out how to make the land work and bring over people. They bring over Africans and they enslave them. They bring over Anglos and they make them indentured servants. The difference being, other than the ethnicity, indentured servants serve for a finite period of time and then are permitted to go and do what they want, where they want. Their families travel with them. Often indentured servants were given land where they had served and that became theirs. By contrast, slaves had their identity taken from them and remained enslaved in perpetuity, as did their children. Thereafter, after freedom in terms of manumission after the Civil War, we see the racism infect the laws so that African Americans could not stay in certain places. And if they stayed more than 30 days, they would be re-enslaved. That extended over a long period of time. Moving forward from the 19th century into the 20th century, African Americans in many places were not allowed to own property. You have laws that say you cannot own property, but also you had institutions. For example, you had redlining through the banking system. Banks literally went block by block to find people of color. And if people of color lived on a certain block, that bank would redline that area, which meant they did not loan money into that area. What that meant was that the simplest and most direct way to the accumulation of wealth, which is you buy property, you own property, you give that to your children, did not happen for people of color. Educational institutions did not let people of color attend them. So the secondary way to move into prosperity, that is through education, was foreclosed for people of color. You had laws that prevented people from voting unless their grandfather or great-grandfather or great-great-grandfather voted. You have an inexorable press of everything involved in the society. Schools in redlined areas, in predominantly African-American areas and Latino areas, had less resources than schools in Anglo areas. The resources of the communities, the creation of public parks, the placement of libraries, all of these things were done through a prism of race. And every part of the spectrum that came through that prism was designed to prevent people of color from rising and to concomitantly keep the Anglo population in control of the people of color. The benefits of that we see flow through to this day, where you have cities that are predominantly people of color, that are policed predominantly by Anglos. You see unions that the source of great consistent employment that refuse to permit African Americans into their membership, so that people of color have part-time, sometime, no time jobs, whereas there is no steady ability to rise in the society that the vast majority of the society takes for granted. Not everybody who benefits from that is a racist, obviously. And we see that from the people whom I know who are participating in this exercise, this multi-log. But acknowledging that is central, in my opinion, to understanding the eternal question of Reverend King: where do we go from here? Do we go to chaos, or do we go to community?
Cool. That's beautiful, Eric. So let's just kind of sit with that for a second, and then we're going to, as Aikidoka, we're going to kind of hold this whole conversation, this whole multi-log, as Eric says, through the lens of our practice, through the lens of our path. So what is this systemic racism? As Aikidoka, how do we respond to systemic racism? And first, let's look at it not necessarily so much as society, not so much as our dojos yet. We're going to go there, but first as individuals.
I think the first thing that comes to mind when I'm asked that question is to just absolutely acknowledge that all of us who get to practice Aikido are coming already from a place of privilege. To be able to practice Aikido is absolutely a privilege. To have the time and the resources to do this martial art that is beautiful is a privilege, regardless of what race we are. So to start and to acknowledge that, and then to be asking the question of who doesn't have that same privilege, and what do I personally need to do, and what is my responsibility around that? And then from a more philosophical perspective, I think we all come from this place of we are attracted to Aikido because it's all about the resolution of conflict resolution and Aikido. However, I think also to say conflict resolution is also a privilege, because many people don't have the ability to live without conflict. If you are living in a place where every single time you walk out the street, you are going to be faced with conflict, we can't just say Aikido is about love and conflict resolution without acknowledging that maybe we need to shift that and to say maybe the practice needs to be more about, we all hate conflict, but maybe it needs to be more about how do we maintain our connections and our relationships in conflict rather than just trying to resolve it. Clearly we have huge conflict that is happening in our society that has just sparked, this week, but it has been going on for 400 years. So how do we maintain ourselves in that conflict, I think is where we have to go with our practice for sure.
Sam.
Yeah, I'm focusing on as the individual. It's really what I'm getting from my training through Aikido, my own composure and the education that I draw from my understanding of the principles. And as I said, my training, and that's both physically and mentally, because remaining calm in an uncomfortable situation, say when I'm being barraged by tear gas and rubber bullets, I had a different reaction than many people. It's not like I've ever been in that situation before, but I was in it now. So that flexibility to really remain calm and level-headed and help those around me was extremely important. That's really physical. But as a more mental practice through Aikido, I was thinking about whether you distance yourself, like Malory was saying, to achieve that harmony, this kind of false bubble where you strip down to the principles and think everything's fine or purport that everything's fine, rather than training yourself to be stronger, to embrace that conflict. And that's in pursuit of collective well-being. And that has to start with the individual, because as Malory said, we don't particularly like conflict, but escalating conflict doesn't do anyone good either, and that starts with yourself. When you enter a situation, you only have control over yourself. So my Aikido training has been to amplify that control in order to help others. So being vulnerable comes from a place of strength. And my Aikido training has hopefully honed that and will continue to let my tolerance grow through that in order to bring others up with me as the individual.
Yeah, beautiful, Sam. Yeah, thank you. I love that you said training yourself to be stronger, but for vulnerability. That's our practice. Beautiful. Mr. Moye, Judge Moye?
I think that I've talked enough to start this off. and don't want to be accused of monopolizing. Having said that, we have such a blessing in this art that was given us. Sosa Sensei, who Miles and I started with, talked about the physical, the mental aspect of Aikido, which came after you felt comfortable with the physical, and then the spiritual aspect of what we do. How we embrace, how we overwhelm a negative energy, how we let it pass, how we do not accept it and draw it in, how we let it pass, how we engage it, is a challenge. And Sam, my God, made a point. The ultimate test is when you're facing people who are shooting at you. How does our Aiki training help us in those times? That's the extreme. The less extreme, but as inexorable, maybe more inexorable, is how we engage with the racism in the society. How does our Aiki help us with that? How does our Aiki assist us in engaging with not just the racism in our society, but the racists, the individuals in our society who, whether they understand or not, embrace this notion of supremacy, which is purely ethnocentric and otherwise fictional, but still such an incredible part of our society. And if I could get a clue as to some of that before I left here tonight, I would be a more blessed man than I am now.
I would challenge that a little bit in that I feel like we've been focusing on letting it pass too much, and Arimi is one of our core movements. And so sometimes you do have to meet things and hold the line. And I've been trying to intentionally practice that more verbally in my interactions, how I hold myself. And it's challenging. And I think kind of what Judge Moye was saying in that our training is to occupy that uncomfortable space in a confident manner. And as I said, I've been focusing more on Arimi. I love like ski Arimi Nage. It kind of lays a person on their back and you want them to be safe, but also they punched you. So doing that more so, finding my voice, calling people out, but still being as aware of my eye as I can and giving others space to also take hold of their own story and space is how I've been moving through the world, especially of late, more intentionally of late. And I think that letting it go by and just letting that problem happen behind you is an acknowledgement of who that person may encounter in the future. Say they're racist and you have that capability to deal with them. And this came up on another film project too. This makes me think of not just racism, but like the Me Too movement and sexism. If you have the power to deal with them, it's your responsibility to.
Absolutely.
Beautiful. Listen,
Probably the last time I want somebody to use the word judge. Miles knew me as Eric back 40 years ago, and that's the way everybody else should. Nobody's in my court today, so let's
You're so cool. I've been reading about you. I'm just gushing.
Great. I was getting warmed up for this conversation with some posts on Facebook, and I suppose what surprised me the most, even though I wasn't surprised, it still surprised me, how many people kind of denied that and they were being authentic. It wasn't like, denied that this is actually an issue. And that's kind of that's where I agree with you, Sam. We should move into that, and let's see if we can shift the conversation a little bit from individuals towards dojos. And I know Malory's doing some interesting initiatives in her dojo.
Well, I totally want to jump in on Sam's comment about Irimi in particular, because I do feel like we have all spent our lifetime studying Aikido, which is the study of power, right? We are studying how we move power, how effectively we are with power, and a toolbox of when you blend and when you enter. And And let's not forget, we are in the middle of a pandemic. And so I've been thinking about this, where there is a foe far bigger than us, in COVID-19. And that's a great example of our toolbox for how we deal with power, is to sit back and to acknowledge that we don't have all the information. This is a bigger foe than we are able to deal with. And it is time to wait and watch and blend and get more information before we act. When suddenly we have race riots in America, and the whole country now focused on what has been a problem for centuries, we have all the data we need. And I think we also already have all the solutions that we need. This is absolutely the time to IRIMI, to enter. I really feel like it is absolutely the responsibility of dojos to figure out how to respond to this in a way and not sit out on the sidelines with the privilege of, oh, this is this beautiful art that we do, but to say who is missing from our mats, and then actively look at what we can be doing to change those demographics, to change the positions of power in our dojos, in the leadership in our organizations. I absolutely want to just echo again Sam's sense of this is a RIMI time.
You want to share a few of the things you guys are doing in your dojo?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we have actively had we're a nonprofit organization with a board of directors. We've actively worked on wanting to increase the diversity of our board of directors with gender, race, and age, which we have done recently, which I feel really good about. We also have really worked on a community writing of an inclusivity statement that we have actively put out. And it's a statement that really starts from the place of acknowledging that everyone who walks into a dojo is walking in with our own bias, and that we are a reflection, of the racism and bias in our society, and that it is absolutely our responsibility to not shy away from that, to look at it and then to respond to it. We also are trying to figure out how to get rid of some of the barriers that exist. So certainly there's the location that your dojo is in, and I have to still call you Judge Eric, I'm sorry. But to look at systemic racism and the redlining, and for cities to look at where are all the dojos in your city? Are they, in areas, that are red line areas? I know in Seattle in particular, most of the dojos are on the north end, and we had some serious real estate issues that basically created white North Seattle. And if that's the case, what can we do about that? Can we be offering programs in community centers in the South End? What does that look like? Obviously taking away financial barriers. So offering scholarships, but on both sides too. I think we, at the same time that we offer scholarships to take barriers away, and I know almost all dojos do, everyone wants to make Aikido accessible, but we also offer a military and law enforcement discount as well too, because our society is going to be better, if that population also has access to de-escalation Aikido. So really trying to think systemically in terms of who is not on your mat and coming up with solutions, I think is really important.
Miles, we were so fortunate in so many ways. The dojo in which you and I first started training was on the south side of Dallas in Oak Cliff, in what used to be a separate city and annex. And by the time we were there, it was predominantly occupied by Latinos and African Americans and a decreasing number of Anglos. What strikes me is that was not an impediment. Our sensei, Bill Sosa, may he rest in peace, reached out to everybody. And it was interesting how people, predominantly Anglo, as I would suspect the vast majority of dojos in the United States are, traveled from other places to go to attend that dojo, even though it was on a street that was the main street of Oak Cliff in the heart of the barrio now, now gentrifying. A really interesting, and I don't want to get too far off of our point here. People travel to what they want, and we'll move, we'll go to an area that is not the poshest part of town with nice parks and a Starbucks and everything else that yuppies today want. I hope there aren't too many yuppies on this call. But people will travel to find this art if they're inclined to do so.
I think
Everybody pick up your dojo, move it to the hood.
something that's really important about that is I feel like in our community, especially the Aikido community, it's hidden in a way. People hide by stripping it down to the principle, and that's not addressing the reality that we live in. It's this kind of fantasy harmony that isn't what people are living. And so going back to what Malory said, that public facing support and doing things is a huge acknowledgement. And I know from never being to her dojo, but I follow and see what she's doing on her website. So many dojos don't have a basic inclusivity statement, which, as you said, people go to where they want to be. If you're not going out and welcoming them, oftentimes people don't want to be there, because personally moving through primarily white spaces through my life, I've felt and noticed that, and I don't want to be the one black or mixed face they see on the mat and think, oh, okay, they can survive here, maybe I can too. You can't pull in that one token and just rely on them. Malory's entire dojo is working on this together and continuously, and being really public about it. And that's what we're seeing more companies do now. And obviously from our laws and from our past, that has not been the norm. It's still not the norm. It's companies going out on a ledge to be this support. And for Aikido community to have words is one thing, when action needs to be reflected on, as you said, who's training on the mat, who's welcome in that space. Because it's a lot to navigate.
And I have to do a shout out to Amanda Page is on the call here, and she has been really the driver of our inclusivity statement, and she's our webmaster and doing a great job with that. But I'm also, I have to say, also embarrassed. I don't think we are doing enough. We are very much a white dojo, and we have put out everything that we can, but we fall short as well too, absolutely. And I think in general, dojos really have to have an acknowledgement of that.
It's funny because
I think dojos need more than an acknowledgement. As laudable as that certainly is, that's talking the talk. It's walking the walk that makes the difference. It's when someone walks into your dojo who looks different, or do they just sit over in the corner and someone says, "Hi, how are you?" and goes on about their business? Are they as welcomed as somebody who looks like a typical Aikido martial arts American student? And the challenge for dojos, I think, is if not outreach, then aggressive inclusivity. There were, I can't count the number of times when there was more than one person of color, more than one African American on the mat at our dojo, and I'll go to my grave knowing that my sensei was interested in spreading the art to everybody, including people who looked like me. And I just don't know the answer to that question. I don't know how to meet that challenge in a dojo today.
Yeah, you know, I could appreciate like traveling to the south side of town, just as Eric was saying, and where there's a diamond, you know, in the rough, and you literally walk in there and I found my home, but not even realizing and that was easy for me. At a certain point in my life, that was easy. You drive over there, I had the time, I had the money, I had the luxury to go over there, but in the opposite direction, move your dojo to the hood, like Eric says, because in the opposite direction, it is not as easy. But I do know that also when we get on the mat, it's equal. Just training in this art, hopefully training in this art, when we put the principles in the middle of the room, we organize around the principles of Aikido, everybody kind of gets equalized. There's depth of experience and seniority, etc. But that disappears. But as soon as you walk out the door, you are walking into a system that is not balanced. And maybe we could kind of shift. Yeah, go ahead, Sam.
Out the door. In the dojo, there's still like that. I don't know how many people are familiar with the term code switching, but we're still very stuck in tradition of this is a Japanese martial art. It's evolved. Our lives have to evolve, and our different like schemata of what it is to be a good typical Aikido student has to shift and change. And I don't think it's equal in the dojo because that added socio-emotional work and weight of trying to navigate a whole new system while you're also trying to learn a martial art. People of color are code switching the entire time primarily and trying to fit into this white space while also learning a mind-boggling martial art. So it's not, that load is not spread equally. And people, even just the microaggressions that people suffer in those spaces is really alienating and difficult and hard. And that is exhausting. It's tiresome. And people don't see that from the get-go. So I really don't think it's equal in and outside the dojo, on or off the mat.
You know, what's interesting, the tiresome, there is a reason that people of color have a higher incidence of hypertension than the rest of the society. The microaggressions, as just described as being tiresome, it's perpetual.
Yeah.
It is, to use a Latin word, every goddamn day, every hour. There is a challenge that has to be met. And, you know, I would hope that people who come and do what we all do, this art, which is so special, I like to think of it, and often did think of it as a safe haven, a place where I got on the mat. It wasn't that Miles or Randy Bonifay or Bill Sosa did not see me as a black man. That's hard to avoid seeing that. But that no longer became the most important thing. What became more important was, here's a guy who really does know how to do this technique. Here's a guy who really doesn't get this ability to do this well. Let me give him what I've got. Let me get what he's got. And I think that's one of the precious things about what we've got. And man, if we could figure out a way to get that purity out of where we are into the rest of the society, what a blessing that would be.
Yeah, beautiful.
I think it's definitely the first step in. Michael also in the chat mentioned he wasn't aware of it. In this martial art, we train our awareness. And as I said, people of color are extremely aware of this filter that they have to go through all the time. And I said, that is mentally burdensome. And a lot of people that's never a filter that they had to insert upon their life in so many contexts.
Amen.
Yeah, so, Sam, could you give some? It lit up the chat when you spoke. Could you say? Could you give some examples of what you mean by code switching and the tiresome?
So just a lot of one of the instances that I was thinking of, I have been asked multiple times if I am Donovan's Waite's daughter, because obviously all Black people in this martial art know each other or are related. There were so few people, I had to be connected to him somehow. He's a dear teacher and dear to my heart, but that's just one major instance of we're not all related, or just a ton of hair comments and touching hair without approval. Cut mine all off. That was separate, but it's just totally changing your language to how you would speak, or just, and I also, as I said, moving through primarily white spaces, I feel this burden, and it's not even to the extent that so many do. But I'm also thinking of, I was recently guarding a store all night, and the really small language that people just say offhand, but make a huge impact on us is, this is not an Aikido, but someone said, oh, we can get back to the justice once our stores are safe. And so that's obviously putting property before life, but that's really honestly what they believed, and they were good people because they really just wanted to protect the store. I would rather be peacefully protesting in a harsh environment than at that store with kind of just these microaggressions that are normal, are daily, and that is not absent from my experiences in dojos. Yeah. It's overwhelming to list them because it's almost constant. And I've been into spaces where people have been really intentional and try and are curious, but even explaining it is burdensome. And I recently made a promise to be vulnerable, and I'm trying because it's difficult and exhausting. And I finally have sleep, so I come on this call to do this, to speak, to share my story, find value in my story for myself, but just be aware of your words. People of color think before they speak all the time, to a different level than I think many people with white privilege need to. So,
You know, and let me follow with what Sam says. The fact that you've got this privilege doesn't make you a bad person. So Miles has white privilege when he's here in the United States. Over much of the world has it. That doesn't make him a bad guy. What happens, what shifts the paradigm is when you refuse to acknowledge that there is a privilege, that you refuse to acknowledge the stresses, the angst that comes from being not just a person of color in the society, a person of color in your dojo. That is so different. Acknowledging that is a huge, critical first step, and being able to say, as Malory started this conversation, I got this privilege. What a blessing. What a blessing to acknowledge that and not feel defensive. Like, okay, I can't acknowledge this because somehow that makes me a bad person. If you take on the burdens of the entire society and you're responsible for the entire society, maybe so, but nobody has that. And it is so important a step to accept and to acknowledge.
Listen, we're going to move, that's beautiful, Eric. We're going to move this to, we're going to open up the mics for everybody and kind of open up the discussion. If anybody has anything to say, it can be a comment or specifically a question for the panelists. Just raise your hand electronically. Below your screen, you'll see a little dashboard. There's a participants button. Click that. A window will open up, I think, over here. You'll see a place to raise your hand electronically. If you have any questions for the panelists or comments, we're going to open the mics for whoever's on. Don, Jet.
Thanks for hosting this call, Miles, and certainly all the panelists. Yeah. It's great to see everyone. It's certainly a delicate topic that we're trying to challenge, speak about. We're nodding our heads here a lot and echoing a lot of the angst of what to do next. So I guess my question our question for the panelists is I think it was mentioned, people kind of know to do something, but when it comes time to do it, we just get kind of stuck. And so we've had a lot of conversations. Our dojo, is in a part of town that's, pretty diverse, I would say. And yet we don't have a lot of people from color. I think maybe in the 5-6 years of our dojo, maybe we've had 8 people or something like that, maybe of color. And they just haven't stayed for whatever reason. And we've talked about it And we said, well, what do we do next? And then nothing happens. So the question is, well, you know, what is the next thing? What can we do? We would like to do something. We're coming up short. And so I'm just expressing that. And I'm sure a lot of people on the call are feeling the same way.
I think a really good first step is definitely an inclusivity statement and making that front and center, because, right, that embraces Aikido principles like nothing else, right? And then really going out into the community, and not just, I would think in an Aikido capacity, I would love dojo events where you're volunteering, or community things where you show your faces in maybe a different light rather than kind of all in this uniform and really foreign gi. But people are just, that's this whole other strange costume a lot of people feel and are not comfortable in, or maybe can't afford. And so having that sliding scale to let people into that training is truly valuable, but also being willing to take that work outside the dojo in order to help bring people in.
Let's open up the mic for.
I'm going to add
Yeah, Malory, go ahead.
too, about
Sure.
really just using your resources, like going the extra mile, like figuring out, I know advertising is not necessarily great in Aikido, but start putting ads out in, magazines, supporting events that are sponsored by people of color, like going to marches with your dojo under a Black Lives Matter banner. I mean, obviously you have to have that not just be, performative, but to have real substance behind it, but really putting yourself out there and moving into communities as a way to say, we are here for you, I think is a critical part of it. But then absolutely thinking more about resources, I would say too, and I love the question, Dawn, because I think it becomes not just an individual dojo, but I think our dojo or our Aikido organizations really need to be playing a role as well too. Putting money behind doing outreach efforts, making sure that people of color who are instructors are highlighted, teaching seminars, getting them on the seminar circuit, getting them on exam panels so that everyone, not only people of color, can see them in leadership roles is a huge part of it. And one of the things too that I think is critical is we all kind of say, oh, I really wish I had more Black people in my dojo, but I don't, oh well. Think about really getting aggressive about putting money behind that. And maybe it is offering a children's program for children of color, and really looking at the days that you can offer camps, like Martin Luther King Day is a perfect example of having all of your children's program focus on that. And also potentially creating a program where you are not only saying we're offering scholarships to people of color, but you might even want to be paying people of color to actually be in like a Deshi program to get them into training to become Aikido teachers, and to have our Aikido organizations think about doing things like that, I think is where we start to look at action.
Great, let's go back to
one of the things that dojos, I'm sorry, go ahead, Miles.
No, just because of the time, I want to go back to I want to open up because we got a lot of hands up. Is that okay, Eric? And,
Yes, sir.
And I also want to ask the people asking the questions to keep them short and to the point, well, as much as you can. Anyways, Robert Kent, your mic is open.
Miles, thanks for doing this. Thank you, everybody. I've taught a course on political Aikido, the martial art of politics, Aikido, Gandhi, and King. And it has always seemed clear to me that protest movements that work well have been doing Aikido for a long time. My question to the group, and particularly to the panelists, is there something that, because we here on this call know maybe a little more than many about Aikido, that we had to contribute, and if so, where and how would we contribute it to the current moment and the current opportunity?
Great question. Great. Eric, you wanna just pick up there?
Yeah, I'm praying on it. I'm praying on that for just a minute. Move on to somebody else first, and I'll offer something, but I want to collect a thought on that.
So,
yeah, please.
That is also someone in the chat mentioned, that's assuming the entire dojo is behind kind of an anti-racist, inclusive environment. And yeah, I don't believe that's political. I think it's a human rights issue. But in what you can do every day is engage in that Aikido practice, because as you said, these movements have really been embracing conflict and changing, but you can also do that in your everyday interactions with people. Don't let racist comments slide. It's just one of those things. You may be uncomfortable in it, but speaking up in those moments is changing our entire culture bit by bit by bit. And there's so many really small stepping stones that if everyone takes, then we're in a whole new place as a society, which is really big for me to think about. I'm hopeless on it sometimes, I'm hopeful for it sometimes, but the more people that commit to that, even if you're not in an environment where that's the general understanding, it's those small interactions that build, in my opinion. So join the movement.
Well, Flaro, your mic is open. Yeah, sorry, Eric, go ahead.
Yeah, we understand the energy, the love, the hate, the anger. All of those are different dynamic energies. And what we have been privileged to understand and try to wrap our arms around is how you engage with those and how you make those work. I think of the dozens of times a day away from work when people will say things, people will do things, and the essence of Aikido is to challenge, to accept that energy, and make it into something positive. Sometimes a teaching moment is guidance and moving from one direction to another direction. Sometimes a teaching moment is a very aggressive attaining. Both of those are lessons, and I think that, sad to say, our society gives us so many opportunities every day to teach people to understand. And sometimes, and one of the things that we've got to do is to have discernment, to understand when someone says to me, "You speak so incredibly articulately."
Yes.
How I engage that when I get on an elevator and someone moves their purse from one side to the other, and my first thought is, my suit costs more than everything you've got in your purse, including your car. And how to engage that individual as opposed to the individual that I sometimes, because God didn't finish with me yet, sometimes I just want to walk into a scene where somebody is bullying a person because of their color or because of their gender. And I just really want to see how quickly I can choke somebody out. We have to balance those two. It does make you want to holler.
Yeah. But meeting that with a smile, hopefully makes them reassess their actions. And that's difficult because, as you said, it makes you want to holler. It's not fun. And just that the word, the amount of times that I've been called articulate is just disproportionate. Or that I was at a school event and one of the other parents thought I was a server or that I worked there in multiple stores and then said, "Oh, you got in here? Yeah, I'm at this private school event. What do you think I'm doing here?" And that's just a few instances of normalcy, or being told that they should get someone better because obviously why would they give me a young Black queer woman to teach my first private class as an uchideshi? And I was the head uchideshi at the time. Who else do you want? My manager is not in class, and also I'm the best resource that you have right now. And the fact that you're shitting on that is ridiculous. And I'm not going to hurt you because that's getting nowhere. but I really, really wanted to. And I knew I could, but that doesn't help anyone for their cause. And these are instances on and off the mat, obviously, but that's still, everyone needs to take the commitment to think about their words and what they say, what they do, to be aware of the situation, and then exist in that uncomfortability, because you may be surprised, because we exist in it all the time. And that intentional just interaction with the world is what Aikido training should help you do, not forgotten when you leave the mat.
So before we go to our small group discussions, we got time for a couple of more comments. Florell, your mic's open.
I really appreciate this conversation on Irimi and using our training to pattern interrupt situations, whether individual situations or all of systemic racism that we interact with. And yeah, my question is about the responsibility to use that training for pattern interrupting, and then especially as white people who train, to actively use the training to pattern interrupt instances of white supremacy. And I am struggling in some of my conversations within the dojo, I guess, to really understand how to train with this specifically, because my sense is that as a predominantly white dojo, we've been able to get kind of spiritual bypassy about what the training is.
Right.
And my sense is that if we're not actively training this as white folks, then it is doing harm and it's perpetuating harm. And so I want to ask what your thoughts are on how to use the explicit requirements of interrupting systemic racism and not get caught in the sort of like all is one bypassy languaging where we kind of avoid the ways in which we're culpable and we're responsible for this. I hope that makes
This
sense.
system has been a really big, scary thing for me of late. And I have to know I'm not taking that on as an individual. And so past like the dojo, right? One of your biggest resources is your wallet. So really know where you're putting your money. You're paying for the dojo. That is something that you're supporting. And so really start that conversation like, we need to do this in order for me to continue to support this dojo. And that's really scary. You've made a lot of connections in your Aikido life and your Aikido world. But the system also relies on money a lot. And so to create change, there has to be so much put on the line for that better future, and know that there are so many other connections that you can make. And I mean, have been posting wildly on Facebook and everything's public. So please do reach out to me. I'm happy to continue the conversation. But what I think of first is where you put your money.
I think we all have to. We have we who are aware, we who are self-aware, we who strive to become more aware, we have an obligation that we cannot let the status quo, we cannot let the systemic issues that have, if not destroyed our country, have certainly prevented our country from being all that it could be, from preventing so many of our citizens from being all that they could be. We can't let those go unchecked. We have to, every time someone, and I'm not talking about somebody telling an ethnic joke, when we recognize implicit bias, when we see someone saying, wow, I can't believe that this individual is doing such a great job in this art. Okay, you gotta challenge that. Tell me what it is that makes you think that this individual, why did you walk in here thinking Sam was not the most brilliant martial artist within 500 miles? What is it that made you say, what is it that made you say that Malory isn't a great martial artist? What is it? What do you mean, you're surprised to see Miles Kessler teaching a class here somewhere? This is not what these people are supposed to do. Whenever we see those, we must engage them. And we must engage them and say, you know what, if you think about this, would you feel differently about Sam if she looked differently? Would you feel differently about Malory if it did not, Malory appeared to be somebody else? And what does that say about you? And that to me is, that is where we've got to strive.
Beautiful. So let's do that now. We're going to lean in. A lot of people want a lot of hands up. We don't have time. We're going to break out into small group discussions. I want to ask everybody to lean in. That means join the breakout group. If you just want to participate, or if you just want to observe, but do bring your energy. And we're gonna go for about 15 minutes because we have to get back to close up the program on time. There'll be space afterwards if people want to hang out and discuss, but we're going to kind of try to stay on schedule now. So we've got breakout groups of 5 each. And what came up for you in this call? You know, from this discussion, what's alive for you, and share that in your group, okay? All right, so we got breakout groups of 5. If Tom, if you could open up the rooms. Everybody, welcome back. How was your discussions? Yeah, great. Rolando has not 1 but 2 thumbs up, and that's great because we're gonna open up Rolando's mic. Rolando, can you open your mic for just a second? This is Rolando Morales, and we're gonna actually close with 8 minutes and 46 seconds of silent reflection, meditation, prayer, and of course, 8 minutes and 46 seconds is apparently the time it takes to kill a man with your knee on his neck. And Rolando's an educator and a teacher of special education in public schools. And he's going to introduce this period of reflection for us. Rolando, mic's yours.
Gracias, Sensei, for the opportunity, and gracias, fellow Aikidoka, for hearing me. I teach at the high school in Berkeley, and my student, a Black girl named Ella, remixed this Shakespearean monologue into her own song of protest about her trauma that I felt both relevant and revolutionary. I hope it touches your spirits. All the world's a gun, and all the men and women merely shoot innocent people. They have their clips and their bullets, and one shot in their time plays many parts, their acts being 7 ages. At first, the child, crying and yelling in their mom's arms. Then the child grows with his father in the grave, and shining morning comes, creeping like a bad day, unwillingly to leave. And then the child, sighing like a man with a gun held at an innocent man, made to hurt, to not hurt, but kill. Then a little girl, full of strange oaths and confused like the war that started, jealous in blood, sudden and quick in death, seeking the bubble of safety even in the man's mouth. And then the gun, in a fair world with good people with eyes wide and curious, a formal cut full of wise words and modern media, and so the good man plays the bad man part. The 6th age shifts into the family man, and his family mourning his death. With snot on nose and tears on side, the son is youthful boy, well saved, a world too wide for a Black man, and their big booming voice turning again toward childish play, pipes and whistles in his sound. Last scene of all that ends this sad, eventful death is second, Black Lives Matter for too many Black men and mere N. Sans guns, sans bullets, sans bad people, sans racism. By Ella Allard Chigamba. Peace.
Amen. Amen.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found. Was blind, but now I see. 'Twas grace that taught my heart to fear, and grace my fears relieved. How precious did that grace appear the hour I first believed. Through many dangers, toils and snares, I have already come. 'Tis grace hath brought me safe thus far, and grace will lead me home, and grace will lead me home. When we've been there 10,000 years, bright shining as the sun, we've no less days to sing God's praise than when we first begun. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found. Was blind, but now I see. Was blind, but now I see.
Okay. So I want to thank everybody for joining us for this this important multi-log. If anybody wants to stick around, we will keep the room open, and if a lot of people stick around, we might even make smaller breakouts. But as we close, I want to thank you all very much for joining us, and I especially want to thank my esteemed panel. Could you guys give like a one breath final few words for our gathering here? We'll start with.
Yeah, of course. What I was thinking about throughout that is we talked about a lot of engagement with others and the small steps to take. But I really liked what Joseph Moye said about implicit bias and investigating that and finding that new level of engagement with yourself, accountability to yourself, and acknowledgement, because it does start with you. As I said, you have control over yourself. So go deeper in your training and be intentional about how you think about things and interact. Even if it's in hindsight, you need to investigate the situations and how you respond to them. Because in hindsight, looking back is how you put that practice into your everyday, your now, and how we move forward together.
Yeah, thank you, Sam. Malory?
Thank you, Sam. Amplifying Sam's voice, staying in connection and conflict.
Beautiful. And Eric?
About 30 years ago, you and I were together, maybe closer to 40, and you said to me, the only thing I can control is myself. Can't control anybody else. All you can do is control yourself. You can either be a bulwark against bigotry, you can be an advocate, an exemplar of justice and equality. It's all up to each and every one of us. Thanks, Miles, for putting this on. Delighted to meet all of you. God bless you.
So thank you very much, everybody. Love you all. Again, I'll leave the room open if you want to stick around and have a conversation. Otherwise, thank you for joining today, and let's fight the good fight. Bye, everybody.
When we've been there 10,000 years, bright shining as the sun.